Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith. Will be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We're joining you, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Bit of a breezy yet crisp morning here on Florida's Space Coast, as SpaceX is preparing to launch its latest batch of 24 Starlink V2 mini satellites into low Earth orbit. We are currently T-minus 58 minutes, 17 seconds and counting from the planned departure of this Falcon 9 rocket from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We are joined, as per usual, by our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, who is running the technical operations of the broadcast. Our photography team of Michael Kane and Adam Bernstein have the morning off. Adam is actually still making his way back from busy time down at Starbase covering Flight 6 of the Starship program. So we'll look forward to welcoming him back in Florida very soon. If you'd like to follow the photography work of either of these two, you can find them on X, formerly Twitter. Adam is at ABurnNYC, Michael at MD Kane Jr. While there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. We are also on Threads and Facebook. We'll also be joined in tracking this Falcon 9 rocket launch this morning by our friend Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions. As with Adam, Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images are also making their way back to Florida after helping us cover the Starship Flight 6 mission. If you'd like to see a 4K replay showcasing the hard work of both Adam as well as Chuck and Jen, you can find that on the channel right now. It's our most recent upload of the Starship Flight 6 4K launch and landing replay. So if you haven't already, go ahead and pop that up in your YouTube queue, save to watch later. Maybe pull it up in a second tab and check that out as we're continuing the countdown with this mission here. As we're getting things rolling this morning, I want to thank the little more than 1,200 of you who are joining with us live. If you haven't already, you could do us a huge favor simply by clicking the like button to allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as we continue on through the count. We're also powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Savius of Texas, Sulfur for Lunch, Bridget Schultz, Pyromac, Scythe427, Mrs. Ed3, Drew P. Gambino, Andy R., and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos as well as our Discord community, and the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments here at the Cape in 4K. In the spirit of growing our community, I want to thank one of our wonderful moderators, Clisty Lee, another one of our channel members as well, for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. So to our 5 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Clistia in the live chat. We hope you decide to stick around in our community. Clistia is also marking 14 months with us as a channel member at the launch director level. Appreciate your ongoing support, Clistia, both as a channel member as well as one of our fabulous moderators. I'll echo her sentiments, saying if you haven't already, please show the team some love and support by clicking the like button. They work hard to bring these live streams to us, and we would certainly appreciate that as well. Speaking of another channel member, Scythe427 has been a member with us for now 4 months, saying, thanks so much, whoever gifted me. You're amazing. Let's go. Last but not least, if you have a comment or question about this launch or just want to offer some words of support and your comment or question is appropriate to be read on the show, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will you be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we continue on through the countdown process, but you'll be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is always greatly appreciated. Speaking of, Super Tech Boy starting us off with a $2 Super Chat. Says, Will's Undisclosed Energy Drink Fund, hashtag not sponsored. And we currently are not sponsored by any beverage company as of yet. So we'll not offer free plugs there. Perhaps that's something we can talk about in the background here to see if maybe we can encourage someone to do so. Now T-minus 52 minutes, 58 seconds and counting. As SpaceX is progressing towards the launch today, I want to talk about the weather outlook for this mission as they're taking a look at the pad there over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station from the perspective of the turn basin here at the KSC press site. You can see the American flag waving quite aggressively there near the countdown clock just behind the shrubs from this camera's vantage point. 45th Weather Squadron launch weather officers forecast just a 10% chance of violating weather during the launch opportunity today. Put another way, it's 90% chance of good weather for launch. Some of the things that those meteorologists are keeping their eye on are the liftoff winds as far as launch pad conditions. As per the additional risks that they are watching, they're also keeping an eye on the upper level wind shear, which is tracking in the low to moderate range of risk on a scale of low to moderate to high. SpaceX does have a launch window for this mission today, being that it is a Starlink flight. Current T0 time is set for 11:07 a.m. Eastern. That is 16:07 UTC for those joining around the world. As long as SpaceX has not begun fueling, they do have the opportunity to punt their T0 time as far back as 2:49 p.m. Eastern, as long as they have not started fueling. Once fueling has begun, SpaceX is committing to a T0 launch attempt, since they use what's known as a load-and-go style of fueling, essentially tanking their Falcon 9 rocket fairly close to the point of liftoff. And since they use a super-cooled, densified liquid oxygen, they use the full capacity of time in their fueling timeline. And so, for whatever reason, there is a technical issue, whether on the ground system side or on the rocket side, that causes them to scrub the launch, then they would have to pivot to a 24-hour turnaround time. Their backup opportunity for this mission, should they need it, is tomorrow, that being Friday, November 22nd, with a window that opens at 10:25 a.m. Eastern, 15:25 UTC. In that backup scenario, the weather outlook is essentially the same. 90% chance of good weather at liftoff. The upper level wind shear decreases as a potential watch item, though, so a slight advantage to a 24-hour backup, but not by a great margin. Liftoff winds are tracking between 20 and 25 miles per hour today. Currently T-minus 49 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. Let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline and the milestones that we're looking for as we continue on through this countdown process today. T-minus 38 minutes is when the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of prop load, assuming that they are ready to move into that. SpaceX does their poll electronically, and so if they feel like everything is running smoothly, they can go ahead and step into this a little bit early. Once the go-ahead for fueling is given, then prop load begins the T-minus 35 minute mark. with a loading of RP-1, or a rocket-grade kerosene, on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen starts flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage tank. T-minus 30 minutes, they begin loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels for the Falcon's first stage. That helium is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same is true on the second stage about 4 or so minutes thereafter. T-minus 23 minutes is when the second stage kerosene tank is full. And at T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, the strong back chill down process begins. It starts with this is when SpaceX is conditioning the feed lines prior to second stage liquid oxygen load. We see it manifest as the so-called big vent, which begins visually about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds and lasts until about T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds, setting up second stage LOX load at T-minus 16 minutes. Moving right along at the 7-minute marker before liftoff, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. That process involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. It helps protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before flight, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract process gets underway. That's when the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings open up, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, reclines about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket, and it stays in that position until liftoff, at which point the Falcon 9 is ready for flight. It'll pull it back in a much more rapid fashion, the TE that is, clear the way for the rocket to sail. T-minus 3 minutes is when the first stage LOX tank is full. Same is true on the second stage, about a minute after that, at which point the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch 45 seconds before the planned liftoff. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlin 1D engines are healthy and ignite, the command to be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for a T0 liftoff. Coming up at 11:07 a.m. Eastern, 16:07 UTC, for T-minus 46 minutes and 4 seconds. We're now T-minus 43 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. SpaceX prepares to make the call on the start of prop load today. They are continuing on a very busy week as far as launching Falcon 9 rockets goes. Taking a look at the bar chart here, you can see where they stand currently on the year for their Falcon family of vehicles. Of course, both the Falcon 9 rocket as well as the Falcon Heavy. So far this year, they stack up to 115 missions, looking for 116 today. That being comprised of 114 Falcon 9 launches and 2 Falcon Heavy flights. There have been 3 so far this week since Sunday. Of course, we've got the one on tap today. And one potentially coming up over the weekend, although keeping our eyes on any potential shifts with the Starlink 9-13 mission. Be sure to save the launch schedule over on our website in your bookmark section of whatever browser you prefer. That way you can keep up to date on any changes to upcoming launches from here in Florida Space Coast, as well as over in California and elsewhere around the world. This morning, Russia launched a Soyuz rocket and a Progress MS-29 spacecraft on its way to the International Space Station. Another resupply mission for them. That spacecraft is set to dock at 9:35 a.m. Eastern on November 23rd. We're now T-minus 39 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. SpaceX is just a couple of minutes away from nominally making the call on the start of prop load today. I want to thank a few more folks for their support in the live chat here. Our thanks to Richard Burrs for our $5 super chat, joining us from Kentucky. Good to see you this morning, Richard. Wolverine Warlord, one of our wonderful channel members, back with a $10 super chat. Appreciate you, Wolverine. Who says, greetings from Michigan, parentheses, go blue. One day I will see one of these live without a helium scrub. Yes, I do remember you were down at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex and unfortunately got tripped up by that helium issue. So certainly hope that for you. It's always impressive to see a launch in person. Channel member Chuck Close with a $25 super chat. Really appreciate that, Chuck, and good to see you this morning, sir. And Wolverine Warlord back again to give 5 more Space Flight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Wolverine. And to our 5 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you all with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Wolverine in the live chat. We hope you stick around with channel membership. During our joint coverage of Starship Flight 6 in partnership with the folks at Lab Padre, we did mention that the International Space Station was set to have a view of Starship launch as it was making its ascent from Starbase in southern Texas. We played some audio communication from NASA astronaut Sonny Williams and NASA astronaut Don Pettit, relaying down to Mission Control Center in Houston that they were able to get a visual on the Starship launch and that Don Pettit was able to do some photography of it. We were hoping that we might be able to bring that image to you during the Starship coverage. As is the case with photography from the ISS, sometimes these things do take time. Happy to report that we do have this image now to share with you from Don Pettit via the International Space Station. You can see the plume from Starship as it made its ascent from down there near the U.S.-Mexico border at Boca Chica Beach. Of course, the Starship rocket is a very important piece of the Artemis architecture, given that it will be used as the human landing system during the Artemis 3 and 4 lunar landings. Following the successful launch of Starship Flight 6, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson replied in a social media post saying, quote, "Congrats to SpaceX on Starship 6 test flight. Exciting to see the Raptor engine restart in space. Major progress towards orbital flight. Starship success is Artemis success. Together we will return humanity to the moon and set our sights on Mars," end quote. We're now at T-minus 36 minutes, 5 seconds and counting. Just about a minute or so away from the point of fueling for this Falcon 9 rocket, assuming that SpaceX is in fact still targeting liftoff at 11:07 a.m. Eastern, 16:07 UTC. It's a byproduct of this time of the morning, but the heat distortion from the vantage point we have here at Kennedy Space Center press site will make it just a bit difficult to tell visually if fueling is underway, but here's what we'll be looking for as best we can see it. Fueling set to start in less than 20 seconds. If you look near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket, you see that tree branch that's, from our vantage point, crossing in front of the Falcon 9 near the base of the first stage. Right now, where that branch is, as I'm speaking, is about where we start to see frost line form as the super cold densified liquid oxygen starts flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. Little vapor will form there as well as the rocket is tanked. Again, because there's a good bit of heat distortion this morning, it will be difficult to tell, so hopefully we'll get word from SpaceX that fueling is in fact underway. But if that's the case, that 11:07 is still the planned T0 liftoff time, Falcon 9 rocket has begun fueling. Now T-minus 31 minutes, 11 seconds and counting. Still quite difficult to discern, but based on our best observations, it does appear that SpaceX has begun fueling its Falcon 9 rocket. The company has not made any statement in the affirmative or the negative, but it does appear as though we're starting to see, distorted though it is because of the heat, that a bit of a frost line is forming near the base of the Falcon 9 first stage. And that would indicate that SpaceX is in fact, actually we do have a statement as I'm speaking right now that prop load is underway, that our eyes do not deceive us, and that the Falcon 9 rocket is tanking towards a T0 liftoff at 11:07 a.m. Eastern, 16:07 UTC. Now T-minus 27 minutes, 47 seconds and counting. If you're just joining us, you're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the Starlink 6-66 mission. The Falcon 9 has just begun fueling within the last several minutes here, targeting a T0 liftoff at 11:07 a.m. Eastern, 16:07 UTC. Also within the last few minutes, SpaceX has begun loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels on the first stage. That helium will be used to pressurize those main propellant tanks during flight. Same will happen on the second stage a couple minutes after that. Taking a look at our live chat here, I want to thank the more than 3,500 of you who are joining with us this late morning here on the East Coast. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. Allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as we continue on. Also want to thank channel member Patty Chichil for a $5 super chat. Good to see you this morning, Patty, who in turn says, "Good morning, Spaceflight Now, and Will Robinson Smith and crew. Live chat peeps, thank you for the best coverage and commentary and the best mods." And I would have to agree that I, in my biased opinion, do believe we have the best mods in the game. Also want to thank Psychonaut69 for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that, Psychonaut. And to our newest channel member, vis-a-vis them, welcome aboard. I'm glad to have you with us. Be sure to thank Psychonaut in the live chat if you haven't already. As we're now T-minus 25 minutes, 44 seconds and counting. Want to talk about where this Falcon 9 rocket is going to be flying once it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? The mission is sending 24 Starlink V2 mini satellites on their way to the 6th shell of the Starlink constellation. What that means for this rocket is that it will be flying in a southeasterly trajectory. You can see the path of the first and ultimately the second stage following that green arc there. The first stage booster, B-1069, will split off during stage separation and is bound for a drone ship landing. SpaceX has 3 drone ships currently in its fleet, 2 here on the East Coast. The one on deck today is a shortfall of gravitas. Assuming a successful booster landing for this drone ship will mark the 86th landing on a shortfall of gravitas and the 293rd booster landing on a drone ship to date. In addition to recovering the first stage booster, SpaceX will also endeavor to recover the payload fairings that are currently encapsulating the Starlink satellites. SpaceX saves about $6 million per recovery effort, as demonstrated in this presentation earlier this year. They float down to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of parachutes and will be brought aboard a recovery vessel, as seen in this image that they shared at the beginning of this year. SpaceX is working to extend the life of both its payload fairings as well as its first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. They don't often share a lot of details about the payload fairings as they fly, but the booster flying today is going to be making its 20th voyage to space and back. The current launch leader for SpaceX among the boosters still in rotation is B-1067, having launched 23 times, most recently on November 11th. Currently T-minus 22 minutes, 8 seconds and counting. Coming up on the start of the chill down of the feed lines prior to second stage LOX load. See that manifest as the so-called big vent. That'll begin visually at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. As we were awaiting this milestone, want to check in with our live chat. Thank Mel Roberts Harold, one of our wonderful channel members, joining us from snowy Chicagoland for snowfall in the books. It says as a side note, Cape looks extra warm from here. And yes, I would assume, given snowfall, that anything sans snow would be much toastier by comparison. I will say, though, from Florida standards, it is a bit chilly this morning, and I say that knowing full well that a Florida definition of chilly is a bit exaggerated by the standards of other parts of the world. Currently about 63 degrees Fahrenheit here. It's going to be a high of 72 and sunny, so certainly nothing to complain about. We'll note, though, it's going to get actually chilly over the next few days here in Florida, with a low tomorrow of 47 degrees, dropping down to a low 43 degrees on Saturday. Downright frosty. And we do see the start of the so-called big vent there at the pad. Right on schedule. Again, this venting will continue on until about T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds ahead of second stage liquid oxygen loading. Now T-minus 17 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. Got just about 30 seconds now left on this vent before it wraps up. And second stage liquid oxygen load can get underway. Taking a look at our live chat here, want to thank the Rubens Music for a 20 Norwegian krona super chat. Appreciate that, Ruben's Music. It says, hello from the cold and dark of North Norway. Hopefully you're finding some bright spots amid the darkness, but appreciate you being here with us. Hopefully we can provide you some artificial light from here in sunny Florida. It's not called the Sunshine State for nothing. Now T-minus 15 minutes, 47 seconds and counting. I mentioned the Falcon 9 rocket supporting this mission, the first stage booster. It's going to be launching for its 20th voyage to space and back. So as we are awaiting its departure, let's go ahead and talk about where it's been before, ahead of this upcoming launch. As is the case with a number of SpaceX's Falcon boosters, its first flight was in support of a NASA mission. In this case, it was a cargo run to the International Space Station, this one being CRS, or Commercial Resupply Services Mission 24, launching on December 21st of 2021 from Pad 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center. That was followed by the launch of a batch of Starlink satellites on Starlink 4-23 on August 28th. That mission followed up by a satellite launch for the company Eutelsat. It's Hotbird 13F communication sat on October 15th, followed by the launch of OneWeb's Batch 15. It was the first flight for SpaceX launching its neighbor here at the Cape. Airbus OneWeb satellites are the manufacturer of these Gen 1 satellites. Final batch of them launched with Group 20, lifting off from Vandenberg Space Force Base earlier this year. Next up, more Starlinks. Starlink 5-3 on February 2nd, followed by SES satellites number 18 and 19 on March 17th. We hit a pretty extensive wave of Starlink satellites, which I believe take us all the way to the present, as I'm just double checking here before making that declarative statement. Yep, we're in Starlink land we go here. We had Starlink 5-6 on May 4th, Starlink 5-12 on June 23rd, 6-9 on August 11th, 6-19 on September 30th of last year, 6-28 on November 18th, 6-36 on December 29th, 6-39 on February 25th, 6-47 on April 5th, 6-57 on May 6th, 10-1 on June 8th, 10-9 on July 27th, 8-10 on August 31st, and most recently, we had Starlink 10-8 on October 26th. Lots of Starlinks dominate this booster's flight history, so why not go ahead and add one more? With, of course, the launch of Starlink 6-66 coming up here, T-minus 12 minutes and 30 seconds. This mission on tap today set to be SpaceX's 78th dedicated Starlink launch that it has attempted this year. Taking a look at the payload on board, 24 Starlinks in total stacked up inside the payload fairings on that Falcon 9 rocket. This being an archive image from a previous Starlink mission. Each of these clocks in about 1,760 pounds, or about 800 kilograms. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon Hall thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering, as opposed to the previously used Krypton Hall thrusters on earlier versions of the Starlink satellite. They were built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle, and they'll be deployed at 180 miles or 291 kilometers altitude at a 43-degree inclination. For those curious, this is what a Starlink V2 mini satellite looks like when it is in its on-orbit configuration, as shown by the good folks over at HEO and Black Sky, capturing the Starlink in flight earlier this year. We're now at T-minus 10 minutes, 34 seconds and counting, just about 3.5 minutes away from the start of the engine chill-down sequence, where SpaceX will flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps and thermally condition them ahead of their ignition in just about 10 minutes. Speaking of those 9 Merlins that give the Falcon 9 its name, let's go ahead and talk about the vehicle as a whole, the workhorse of the SpaceX fleet, which currently stands at 70 meters or 229 feet tall, with a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Most of that is made up by the first stage here at the base of the rocket. Again, this Falcon 9 first stage has flown 19 times before, looking for flight number 20 for Falcon Booster 1069. At the base of the Falcon 9 rocket are those 9 Merlin engines I was just talking about, which burn a rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that are used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Today they are using the drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core surrounded by carbon fiber. In that image to the right of the rocket, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere, tail first like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the Falcon 9's second stage. And at first stage main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. The second stage engine nozzle is also housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle, which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight, placing the 24 Starlink V2 mini satellites into their intended orbit. The MVAC engine burns the same prop mix, that being RP1, or that rocket-grade kerosene, as well as liquid oxygen. Following the deployment of the Starlink satellites, the upper stage will ignite for a third time as it performs a deorbit burn, driving the upper stage back into the atmosphere, where it will burn up and help eliminate the risk of creating unnecessary space debris on this mission. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings, which currently encapsulate the 24 Starlink satellites. The fairings are made up of a carbon composite material and stand at 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. 2 halves of the payload fairings will be recovered a little bit further downrange from where the drone ship is set to recover the Falcon 9's first stage. As with the booster, they will be brought back into Port Canaveral, turned over to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, ahead of being refurbished and turned around for future flights. Again, SpaceX is working to certify both its Falcon 9 first stage boosters as well as its payload fairings to support the launch of up to 40 missions. Now T-minus 5 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. As things continue to progress well with this Falcon 9 rocket and its countdown, the first stage kerosene tank loading will have just concluded within the last 30 seconds. And the engine chill down also well underway.
Tanks are pressing for strong back retract.
As you just heard, we're T-minus 4 minutes, 46 seconds and counting. We do have mission audio now coming in from SpaceX, and they are preparing for that strong back retract sequence to get underway. That's when the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings open up, and then the transporter erector with a strong back reclines about 1.5 degrees
back retract has started.
Away from the Falcon 9 rocket. As we are coming into the final few minutes of the count, if you haven't already, certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us, allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. As you can see, those clamp arms opening up in this pad view from SpaceX. We'll note for the record the difference between our countdown clock and what you see from SpaceX. Our clock is in real time. What's coming in from SpaceX is on a slight delay, so as long as we've got visual on the rocket from our tracking cameras, we'll be making those call-outs in real time. Now T-minus 2 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. Should be hearing a call out briefly about the first stage LOX tank.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
There we go. Now what's remaining is for second stage liquid oxygen load to wrap up, which should be coming in the next 30 seconds.